Hello, I hope you're all well. Thank you very much for joining us for this special webinar to mark a special milestone for the Society of the Environment and the Chartered Environmentalist registration. This week, 20 years ago, the very first Chartered Environmentalist certificates were signed and presented. We're quite proud of our progress so far and what we collectively stand for, which centres on giving proven, competent professionals who protect and enhance the environment the tools and recognition to make a difference. Our overall is a sustainable future. So whilst we have a good pinch of pride, we are also very realistic. We haven't yet achieved our vision. We believe that registered environmental professionals will lead the way, though, locally, globally, across professions and collectively. And today we're here to talk to three of those Chartered Environmentalists. We're going to talk about their careers and what the Chartered Environmentalist, or CEnv, registration means to them, and a bit of a reflection on what they see as progress and so on for the last 20 years, I suppose. I hope that by the end of this webinar, current Chartered Environmentalists are left feeling proud and energised, and future Chartered Environmentalists who are listening today and watching, I hope that they feel a bit of inspiration and the idea of being raring to go, possibly. Okay, a very, very brief introduction to the Society of the Environment if you don't know who we are. We hold the 3 professional registers for environmental professionals. So these are the Chartered Environmentalist, Registered Environmental Practitioner, and Registered Environmental Technician. But today, we are focused pretty much purely, probably, on the Chartered Environmentalist register, which is the one on your left-hand side of the screen there. Now, since starting 20 years ago with 65 CEnvs on the first day, there are now very nearly 8,000 Chartered Environmentalists around the world. And each CEnv has registered through their membership of one of these professional bodies on your screen. So to achieve the environmental chartership that we're talking about, you will need to be a member of and apply via one of these professional bodies. Hopefully one or 2 of those you recognise. If you wanted to find out more about becoming a Chartered Environmentalist, then please visit SocEnv website, which is socenv.org.uk, so socenv.org.uk, or you can inquire with the relevant professional body directly. About enough from me really at the moment. So as mentioned, we have 3 Chartered Environmentalist registrants with us today to talk about how CEnv has helped them personally and within their careers, as well as their reflections of this 20-year milestone that we're talking about. So each speaker has had a different career path to date, and each is registered via a different professional body. So one of those professional bodies that you saw on your screen a moment ago. 2 of our guests were part of the first cohort of 65 Chartered Environmentalists 20 years ago. And one guest, which is Erin, is a relative newbie, which we hope will provide some differing perspectives, but also maybe some key similarities, no matter what backgrounds they're from, who knows. So firstly, each of our guests will have a few minutes each to introduce who they are and why they do what they do and how Chartered Environmentalist registration fits in now and how it has done over the years. And first, to provide his insights is Jim Longhurst, who is Emeritus Professor of Environmental Science at the University of West of England, and is registered as a Chartered Environmentalist via the Institution of Environmental Sciences, which is also known as the IES, and has been for the last 20 years. So welcome to Jim. If it's okay with you, I'll hand over to you.
Well, thank you, Phil, and good afternoon to everyone that's joining us for this really enjoyable event celebrating 20 years of Chartered Environmentalists being awarded through the relevant licence bodies, but under the umbrella of SocEnv. I was very proud at one point to be a director of the Society way back in 2004, serving till 2006, and was one of those individuals who was promoting the ideas of an umbrella organisation to bring together all of the different environmental and related bodies that are now part of SocEnv. That goes back to work in the 1990s and various things that preceded SocEnv, such as CUBE and the Forum of Environmental Professionals. Some of my IES colleagues, I must mention for their critical roles: Will Pope, Carolyn Roberts, Steve Martin, and many others who are absolutely instrumental in helping to get the society to the point where it could submit for a charter, a royal charter, and then be in a position to actually license the organizations to award the Chartered Environmentalist designation. Let me tell you that getting a royal charter for a professional institution is not an easy task. There are enormous things that one has to do in order to create the package of paperwork and to provide the indemnities and assurances about the operation. So to be in a position where we are 20 years on and to celebrate the achievement not just of a handful from cohort 1, but actually, as Phil has just said, some 8,000 or thereabouts Chartered Environmentalists, principally, I guess, in the UK and Ireland, but also around the world. So my career, well, I'm now retired, and I can recommend retirement to you. But of course, I now do for free many of the things I used to get paid for. My career has been in the University of the West of England, where for many, many years I was the Assistant Vice Chancellor for Environment and Sustainability. That job was one in which I had, as I joked, a license to meddle in everything the university did, because there is nothing that sustainability does not have a role in. So that means I was able to promote the place of sustainability in the educational offering of the university, in our research, in our campus development, and of course in our community engagement. But I had a very fortunate set of employers in the university who encouraged me to be involved in organizations that were about the environment. Hence my involvement as chair of the council of the IES and helping to promote the development of SocEnv and the Chartered Environmentalist designation, but also many other organizations where, being a Chartered Environmentalist, where having my research background as a professor of environmental science, I wasn't just a theoretician, but CEnv was about the practical applications of knowledge, the ability to communicate, and the underpinning that Chartered Environmentalists provides about your ability to engage with other disciplines and to create an understanding of not just why, but how and when and where the environmental issue should be presented. And all the things that I have done, whether that is chairing university bodies inside and outside of my own institution, the National Environmental Association of Universities and Colleges, which I chaired for several years, or the Environmental Protection UK organisation, which is now part of the IES, all of those things, having CEnv after your name, brings a certain prior understanding of your capabilities, your competencies, and the clutch of things that you're able to bring to bear. And in my research work, it has also helped, and in my consultancy and knowledge exchange activities, external partners, whether they are national governments, international governments, or local authorities or charities, all of those, they see CEnv after your name and they know that there is a certain level of capability and responsibility vested in that title. And that all comes from the hard work that many, many people did 20 years ago to get us to this position. So I was very fortunate to be grandparented into a Chartered Environmentalist, because in order for a licensed body to award the designation, you had to have a cohort of people in your organisation that could test the individuals that were coming forward to be chartered. And so I was very fortunate to be one of those. I think my number is 50, but I'd need to check the certificate. But one of those first individuals. And I think we were all very excited at that point, but also slightly unsure. What was this beast that we were unleashing on a mostly unsuspecting world at that point? And to see it grow and thrive and to develop in the way it has done, with additional registrations and new license bodies coming into the organization, is all really great. But we live in a world which has enormous environmental and broader sustainability crises that are interlinked. CEnvs have a role to play in helping to provide solutions, to share understanding, to live up to the charitable objective of the society, which is about sharing knowledge and providing solutions. But there is such a huge amount of work to do that we need ever more CEnvs. We need more licensed bodies. The work is not done by a long way. So hats off to CEnvs at 20. It's a great achievement, but as I say, so much more that needs to be done. We need to see chartered environmentalists across all forms of discipline, working in every profession, because there is no profession, no discipline where the role of a chartered environmentalist cannot add value. So with that, Phil, can I say thank you for the opportunity to join in this celebration, and hopefully some of those words resonate with those of my colleagues who will speak next. So thank you.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Jim. What a brilliant introduction to what we're talking about today. So thank you very much for that. Next up is John Prichard. John is now the visiting professor at the University of Surrey. And before we started the webinar going live, John mentioned he has various voluntary roles and so on that maybe he might mention in his introduction. But John is also the former CEO of the Institution of Chemical Engineers and the Engineering Council, for example. John is registered as a Chartered Environmentalist via the Institution of Civil Engineers and has been for the last 20 years. So I'll leave the rest of the introduction to John and hand over to John, and I shall share your slides.
Thank you, Phil. That's great. I think a bit like Jim, I can't believe it's 20 years since the Royal Charter. I was trying to work out whether I had met Jim. I think I was a director at the time that the incorporation took place, so I probably did meet Jim at that point. And I put up there just a quick picture of a Royal Charter for those that haven't seen them. It's a document written on vellum with a big sort of seal on it, signed by the Privy Council on behalf of Her Majesty the Queen, as it was at that time. Obviously, the King would be issuing them today. Next slide, please. But I've had a slightly different pathway from Jim. I started out going to Sandhurst and spending time in the army. And it's really interesting because people sort of say, oh, how can you be an environmentalist and be in the army? But actually, when one looks at what the role of the British Army is in particular, it's about protecting. It's about protecting people. It's about protecting places. It's about protecting the environment. And actually, the army today does quite a lot in terms of environmental protection, particularly around its defence estates. Next slide, please. But after Sandhurst, I went into the Royal Engineers, and that was all about bridging, mobility, sustaining the army in the field. But a lot of people don't know this, that you have three roles in the Royal Engineers. You have a soldier, you have a combat engineer, and then you have a sort of a professional engineer. So I became a chartered civil engineer in the army, and was doing things like when in Kosovo, building schools for the local population and doing all sorts of things around the water supply to Pristina, and helping ensure that the country can get back on its feet after a sort of a period of austerity and conflict. Next slide, please. But after the army, I went off to the Institution of Civil Engineers, where initially I was the qualifications director, and then I became the technical director. But whilst I was the qualifications director, I'm very interested in understanding how civil engineers play a key role in protecting the environment. and engaged with the early sort of committee that was forming SocEnv at that time, in order to say the ICE ought to be a part of this. And so I played a key role with Jean Venables, who was the vice president at the time, in ensuring that the ICE was a part of the SocEnv at its formation, because civil engineers clearly, in my view, have a very key role to play in ensuring that infrastructure, the built environment, does not contravene what are effectively the sort of the rules of the planet. And we'll come perhaps onto that a bit later. Next slide, please. But after the ICE, I went off to an engineering consultancy, High Point Rendell, now known as Rendell's Limited. And we did a number of structures. They were the company, Rendell's were the company that designed the Thames Barrier. We were doing a lot of fluvial maritime work and bridges. So a typical civil engineering type role. Next slide, please. But I then moved off to the Engineering Council and was responsible for running the three registers of the Engineering Council, which is Chartered Engineer, Incorporated Engineer, Engineering Technician. But what you'll see is that I've sort of post-army developed a bit of a theme about sort of understanding professional regulation and professional qualification. And this was clearly the regulatory piece. It licensed at the time 35 licensed members, a bit like SocEnv. But in terms of what I was doing there as a chartered environmentalist, very much promoting sustainability. So we issued sustainability guidance and we promoted that quite extensively during my 6 years at the Engineering Council. After that, I moved across to the Institution of Chemical Engineers. And what I found really interesting about that opportunity was prior to going to IChemE, I suppose as a civil engineer, you tended to approach things with a bit more with a blunt instrument approach, and that you were only really worried about your local structures, your local loading, your local factors, in terms of when you're doing the detailed design. As a chemical engineer, they introduced to me to a number of other different concepts, and I think that one of the messages I got today is there are a number of bodies in SocEnv. Don't just limit yourself to looking at what your body does. Do look over the fence. Do look and see what others do, because I think you learn so much from others. I learned here, my big takeaway from IChemE was, unless you have molecular understanding, you probably can't solve the whole problem. And so it is about, they do a lot of work in things like mass balance, energy balance. They do a lot more around holistic risk management. And whilst civil engineers will deal with project risk and strategic risk and what have you, the risk tools that chemical engineers have evolved over time, I think others can learn from. So the big takeaway from that was, please do look over the fence and see what others are doing and see what you can learn from them. Next slide, please. So after that, sort of the final role of the full-time DICE, it was with the Mineral Products Association. And if you look at their website, they're responsible for all the quarries that win aggregates, sand, gravel, lime, all these sort of minerals that come out of the ground and are used generally 90% in construction, but actually in a number of other products and production of other materials. And clearly, when you look at sort of the cement industry, that across the globe produces around 8% of CO2. In the UK, it's running at about 2.5% of CO2 production as a byproduct of cement industry. But actually, the UK is leading the way on decarbonising what are energy intensive processes. So I was quite pleased to be joining an organisation that was really focused on its pathway to net zero and undertaking steps to get there. There's still further distance to go, but there is a plan to get there by 2050, but it will require things like sort of carbon capture, storage, utilisation and the like in order to secure that growth. Or we need to find another product that replaces cement, but that is quite difficult given the properties material. But when you look at that, next slide, please. After the MPA, as I said, I've moved into all sorts of things. I have had 6 years as chair of the charity Engineers Without Borders. And during that time, we moved from placing individual engineers to do local good in local villages or in parts of the world that needed help, to focusing on actually there is no planet B. We have reached the tipping point. How do we ensure that tomorrow's generations can have the same opportunity that we had, and that requires a different mindset and a different approach to tackling the problems. Next slide, please. So when I was looking at this sort of from a global perspective, we all recognise the picture shown there, which is the shrinking planet, and how many hectares of land per capita there are in the population over the last 150 years, and that is an issue that we all face. But alongside of that, we also have a number of other issues arising from poor environmental behaviour in the past that we as environmentalists need to be thinking about and how we tackle. So one of the things that we were asked to sort of think about in talking today was what is the future for environmentalists, chartered environmentalists in particular. And actually you look at all these problem statements and each of them, when you look across the licensed bodies, the professional bodies that are nominating chartered environmentalists to SocEnv, you see that actually they're covering all of these problem issues through their daily work. So I think that there's a huge opportunity for chartered environmentalists to play a critical role in delivering a better planet for future generations. And fundamentally, we're all interested in sustainability. We all perhaps are familiar with sort of the Brundtland statement and the like, but actually it's about making a difference, and that's why I think it's been really good. So my final slide is just a quick look at the Thames Barrier, and as I said, I worked for the company that designed the Thames Barrier, which was Reynolds Palmer Tritton in its guise then, and when that opened in 1984, it was closing 4 times a year effectively to defend London from flooding. Today it probably closes on every highest astronomical tide. That's on a monthly basis, and the net result is that it's been lifed out till 2080. We do need to defend London beyond that, and we do need to think about how we manage the consequences of changing the profile of a river like the Thames. So I think there's great work for chartered environmentalists to take part in projects such as replacing the Thames Barrier, which is a work in progress, but it has to happen within your lifetime. So that's all from me, and I'm happy to hand over. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Quite useful to end on a very, very real example of the impacts of things like climate changes and the other environmental challenges that we have around the world at the moment that chartered environmentalists can collectively address. So thank you very much, John, for that. Now we've gone through with Jim through kind of academia in a way, and John through the military, and then professional bodies and a bit of consultancy in there as well. And we're going to now go on to speak to Erin. So our final speaker is Erin Gill, who is his Global Marketing Director at Arup. So we're moving into the world of marketing at a consultancy. Erin is registered as a Chartered Environmentalist with the Energy Institute, and Erin is, like mentioned at the very start, our relative newbie to the Chartered Environmentalist registration, having registered just last year, which is 2023, if you're listening on the recording.
I'm saying hello from Ottawa. I grew up in Canada, but my career has been in the UK. And I won't take you through the detail of my career. I'll just paint a kind of broad brushstroke. The first 20 years of my career, I spent as a journalist, and I chose to be an energy and environment journalist. So I specialized in climate policy, in environmental reporting on environmental policy and regulation and the debates around that. And I wrote and commissioned other people to write for expert audiences, so audiences that were working in business and government and who really needed to have deep understanding of some of the issues that were being debated and discussed. And I think the reason I chose to become an environmental and energy journalist were twofold. One was that I grew up in a beautiful place where the fresh water is still safe to swim in, and in fact I went for a swim yesterday. But so I really cared about nature deeply, and I think that made a huge difference. I had a lot of exposure to the natural world at a young age. But the other reason that I made that decision to to focus on environmental and energy journalism was because I was coming of age at around the time of the Kyoto Protocol, which was the first time that the world's governments came together and said, we are going to do something about climate change. And that was in the mid-90s. And it really had a big impact on me. And I decided that that's what I wanted to focus on. So I did that. One of the things I experienced as a journalist is that I loved what I was learning, and I really did have to learn quite deeply. A lot of EU scientific reports, which are very detailed. I know a lot about chemical impacts on the human body and on the environment, thanks to that. And all sorts of other issues, contaminated land, etc. But I was feeling like I was just scratching the surface. So I chose to do a PhD, and I undertook a PhD focused on environmental history, particularly the history of the organic food and farming movement. But really what it meant was that I studied for quite a few years the history of the Industrial Revolution and the post-industrial period and the kind of environmental movements that came out of that. I did that alongside my journalism. I did some teaching as well, and I did do a course. I did teach a course about the rise of the environmental movement, and I loved teaching that. And then I chose to leave, and as Phil mentioned, I work for Arup. So I left journalism, and I chose not to become an academic. And I focused on working in a business. And I think one of the reasons I really wanted to do that is because journalists, stand on the sidelines and say, hey, this is what's happening, and this is wrong, or this is right. And I wanted to be more part of making things happen. I joined Arup in 2013, and I was in the sort of a work winning and marketing role, and gradually, I've had a number of roles over the course of more than a decade here. I'm in our Ottawa office right now, which is one of our newest offices, and I'm now the global marketing director. And I think the reason I became a Chartered Environmentalist, Phil, I just want you to know this, is that I reported years ago when the CEnv accreditation became available. I reported on it, and I remember thinking it was a great idea, and I thought, I'd love to do that. And I put it off, and I put it off, and I put it off, and I did feel like I had the knowledge. I mean, I have a broad understanding of environmental policy regulation, the business response to it, and as well as environmental history, but I never kind of I never prioritized it. So I was procrastinating, and I eventually got my act together and applied and went through the process. And I'm really, really glad I did. But I think for me, it's primarily a personal thing. It's not something about proving myself to be an effective, competent professional, because I have done that separately through a professional qualification in marketing. So I've had to kind of do it twice, but I really wanted to do this for myself. And I'd just like to finish on some of the things that Jim and John mentioned. Yes, we need more Chartered Environmentalists, I think we do, but we also, I think, need to ask ourselves, is the work that we are doing having a sufficient impact? Individuals can, I think, with our best intentions, we can get caught up in doing things that maybe look good on paper, but don't actually have the impact that we need them to have on the natural world and protecting that ecosystem, that world we care about. So I'd say what we need to do is really focus on how quickly can we decarbonize, take the carbon out of the systems, out of how we work, how we live. How do we build resilience? And we do need to build resilience in a low carbon manner. We're going to hit some tipping points if we haven't already. And we need to also help communities be able to recover repeatedly and repeatedly, because this beautiful place where I grew up, where I went swimming yesterday, was one of the places that had that horrible yellow smoke from those forest fires that Canada cannot stop. Those forest fires are, they cover areas that are larger than the UK. Right? And they're going to come back year after year. So that's me.
Okay. Thank you very much, Erin. A poignant message to finish on there. So thank you very much, and really interesting to hear about your journey so far, your career. So many thanks again to Erin to begin with, and to Jim and John as well for your presentation. For everyone watching, please do stick around. This is not the end of the webinar. It's question and answer time, and I might start off with a question for each one of you. Actually, I'm going to go to John to begin with. I've been known sometimes to say something along the lines of somebody who has chartered engineer and chartered environmentalist registration is getting on towards superhero status with their kind of combined knowledge of how you take your core engineering skills and then you combine it with your, you have a great deal of knowledge around the environment because you become chartered, so you must do. So those kind of joint skills can really make a difference, I think. And I just wondered what your thoughts were on that. Not necessarily my superhero idea, but as a concept of, you've these core skills that you might have gone to university as an engineer, and then you develop all this knowledge and become a chartered environmentalist, and what that might mean for sectors as a whole.
Phil, thank you. It's a really interesting question. So if you take civil engineer as a discipline, there are 5 fundamental components to what is in civil engineering. It's a study of the ground and geotechnics, what you're building on or what you're working with in terms of material. A study of the sort of where you're building, so survey and measurement and how much of it you're doing and that sort of thing. An understanding of the materials and how they work, and then an understanding of sort of fluid mechanics, either whether flows of water or air blowing onto structures or solutions that you're providing, and then the structures itself, the structural mechanics, and how something will work, how it will stand up. There's not enough time in any degree program. So civil engineering is just an example of a degree program. You pack all of that in and then you give electives. And I think sort of what I regret from my primary sort of degree education was not enough focus on environmental. I think courses today are better, but I think could be even better yet in terms of getting individuals as they go through this journey to understand 2 things fundamentally. One is what you're producing must effectively move to that philosophy of do no harm, and I think that's, I think Erin was touching on something similar in her piece. I think you've really got to think about how you deliver that outcome, and I think secondly is life is a learning journey, and you get all sorts of labels given to it: continuous professional development, lifelong learning, whatever it is. And the good news is that everybody who's on this call who has an interest in this is in a good place on that journey. But what we also need to do is encourage others to get on that journey, because unless we can persuade others of the importance of understanding, fundamental understanding of the milestones in that journey, we won't get to the destination that we need to get to. So when it comes to that initial sort of question about can you do both, how easy, how hard is it, is there merit in doing both, we've all got different start points for our journeys. On that journey, recognizing that the environmental component has to become more dominant, I think is the key to long-term success. And I think that's so from my perspective. If you, as I said, I was protecting stuff in the army, but it wasn't necessarily the environment. And what I've sort of discovered on my personal journey is actually there's much more needs to be done to protect the planet, and therefore and habitats and environments along the way. That's the big learning point for me personally, and bringing that together means that as a civil engineer starting point, that influences, that's the context into which I can deploy my environmental understanding.
That makes a lot of sense, and I'm going to draw a similar connection in terms of engineering and chartered environmentalists specifically purely because of your work with the Engineers Without Borders. I was very pleased to be invited to their 20-year anniversary not too long ago, and I'd encourage people who are watching to go and have a look at what the Engineers Without Borders doing in terms of their they're doing a program at the moment. I can't remember what it's called. I must admit it slips my mind, but basically upskilling engineers with this added environmental and knowledge, and there's an incredible pathway that
there are two very
up.
quickly. There are two components they're doing. One is that they've done reimagining the degree engineering degree map. So there's a mapping piece, and then they're providing a compass, and the compass is what you're talking about in terms of the skilling piece. So if you look at the Engineers Without Borders UK website, you'll find both the map and the compass as the two tools to help people navigate the journey ahead.
I was very much taken by it, so I'm very I knew you'd know more than I did, so thank you very much for that. You also mentioned persuading others to join the journey, and I wanted to come to Jim next, if that's okay. I wondered how CEnv, Chartered Environmentalist, might become more of a defined route for university students, obviously going through their studies, whether it's through environmental sciences or something related like that, or whether it's broader than that, I don't know. And kind of how can we encourage them to join that pathway? Yes, there are 8,000 Chartered Environmentalists now, but as I think you said during your talk, we need many, many more to be leading the way.
Yeah, we most certainly do. You're absolutely right. There is a role for universities. And if you look across the various professional bodies that are licensed by SocEnv, you will see many of them already accredit programs of study. Civil engineers being one example, but the IES accredits many different environmental programs that a graduate with an environmental science or indeed cognate discipline, such as geography or even some of the biology disciplines, when they graduate with an accredited degree, they're on the route that ultimately, should they so wish, will take them to a position where they have a membership of a professional body and onwards to chartership and any other designations. So it's already happening, but it's the scale. The scale is way, way too small for it to have the sort of impact that we need in the face of these many crises that we are facing and which sadly are going to intensify before they get better. So one of the things that we also need to start thinking about is something that Erin commented on, which is resilience, building resilience in the face of change, but doing so in a way that is equitable, that is just, so that transformation to a better, more sustainable future is actually one in which we have at the front of our thinking the need to make a more equitable future for all of the things that we share the planet with, as well as our fellow humans. And we just have a lot of work to do in order to realize that type of future and then to enable it. And so as Chartered Environmentalists move into their different areas of work, we might need to look again at what it is that enables a Chartered Environmentalist to be designated and to broaden out that concept of justice, that concept of equality. Call it what you might like, but I think we need to look again. It's been 20 years since we first formulated the various requirements, which we call competencies. We should have a refresh at an appropriate point. Others will take up that mantle and will ask the difficult questions about what are the competencies, and they will feed back into university curricula. The professional bodies that are licensed will gradually bring that into their accreditations. And we do have some fantastic programs. I'm going to give a little plug right now for one that I was instrumental, along with some IES colleagues, in setting up the very first Masters in Environmental Consultancy anywhere in the world. That's the MSc Environmental Consultancy at UE Bristol. And that is accredited initially by the IES, but now also has accreditation from IEMA and CEnv and various alumni now of that program, which came into existence just about the time that Cube was migrating into SocEnv. They are in some very strong leadership roles now, and many have gone on to become chartered. So the role of higher education is a critical one. It's not the only one, but it is a critical one. And I'm very proud to have played a small role in helping our students on that journey to leadership roles and charterships.
Well, I don't mind the odd plug. I'll let you have that one. That's not a problem. It is worth noting, though, that we do review our standards, sort of competencies on a semi-regular basis, the last one being as of last year. So they do get a good checking over. It's fair to say checking over is probably the wrong turn of phrase, but we do need to keep them up to date. You're absolutely correct with that. And we do need to move at the times to make sure that the professionals that are doing the work to protect and enhance the environment and leading the way have the correct skills. And that's not just the technical environment skills. As the three of you will certainly well know, Chartered Environmentalist it features heavily with professionalism and what that means, not just in environmental context, but it also has ethics and so on throughout that. So very interesting points indeed. Now, Erin, I've got a question for you here, which is kind of relates to a response you've given to one of the questions in the chat actually as well. So, and it's more to do in a way with your employer, I suppose. I know that Arup are one of the biggest employers of Chartered Environmentalists.
Are we? Okay. That's great to hear. I do know we have, I work alongside many Chartered Environmentalists, yes.
I thought you might do. Most of those Chartered Environmentalists, I guess, are probably consultants, I guess. How important is environmental competence and that overall professionalism as something that you can demonstrate to a consultancy like Arup?
So are you asking, is it important for a consultant working for Arup to be able to demonstrate to the people above them, you know, that they're competent, that they have the environmental knowledge that a client would need? Is that what you're saying?
Well, I was looking at it initially from a slightly different way around. How important is it for the organisation like Arup to be able to win work and to be able to trust and so on?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely critical. And I would say that you can probably see this if you're looking at the kind of roles that consultancies such as Arup, but many other consultancies are advertising. You know, energy. So people with deep understanding of the energy market or the water industry, as well as people who they're looking for people who they would hire to become clearly kind of climate change consultants or environmental consultants. But even when the job title itself doesn't say, you know, environmental or climate, the required knowledge is always focused on things like, you know, does the person who's going to be appointed really understand what drives climate change? What are the primary sources of emissions? You know, if you don't know that, how helpful are you going to be to clients? Do people understand the impacts on habitats of certain approaches to infrastructure design? Do people understand where the biggest blocks of embodied carbon are in buildings and in pieces of infrastructure? How can we reduce that embodied carbon? How can we reduce the operational carbon of any structures and buildings that we're operating? So I would say environmental knowledge is needed everywhere. There isn't enough of it. So there are talent wars, even in situations where, you know, consultancies may be facing commercial challenges at times. What I have observed is we are all still looking for the people who have deep knowledge of environmental issues and climate change, combined with whatever technical area they're also or industry they're working in. It's very notable.
It's really good to know. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
And based on that, the question that you've answered, let's go to that question. How far into your career do you think is an appropriate time to consider applying for CEnv? Does anybody have any ideas for a response to that one? I know, Erin, you've put a response in there, so maybe I could go to you first.
Yeah, I think it really depends on whether a chartership is a kind of prerequisite to moving into another stage in your career. So in certain organizations, securing chartership is crucial to, you know, promotion or to being able to take on certain responsibilities in terms of leading a project, etc. So therefore, there may be, you know, an age or a point in your career where your employer more or less expects you to achieve chartership. And it can, I certainly have noticed that many of the people who work at Arup who are chartered environmentalists are securing that chartership quite early in their careers. I hope they're still learning afterwards as well, right? Because it's a really big field. You can never know everything, right? So I may have knowledge of contaminated land and some of the issues around contaminated land that another chartered environmentalist won't have because of my career background. So we can always keep learning. But I also think we should just encourage people to pursue chartered environmentalist status, perhaps for the reason that I did, which is I want to be able to say to myself, all of this learning, all of this experience that I've built up, I'd just like to say I'm a chartered environmentalist.
Yeah, why not? It's certainly a badge to have, and hopefully it's a badge of honor in a way. So it's brilliant. John, could I come over to you?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question, because I think it'll vary by which pathway you are taking on your journey. And you know, if you, as Erin said there, if you're in an employer that's geared up to deliver chartership, then you'll have a certain expectation sitting there from your employer. But actually, it's really interesting, because having run a professional body, we sort of took the view across the whole of the membership that in your professional membership, your first third is focused on that initial qualification. The second 2/3 of your professional membership, so that's probably your first 10 years. The next 20 or 30 years is going to be then what do you do with it? It's what you learn thereafter. So professional bodies really have to get that balance right between their resource allocation, ensuring that they're supporting people to get professionally registered by early 30s on average, although there's a very long tail, as Erin or others might say, but actually the second 2/3 of your career is then what you do with it, and that's probably the most important thing, because that's when you make a difference. And the whole professional registration piece is around peer recognition. So it is about securing the recognition of your peers that you have attained a professional standard and that you have committed to maintaining your competence on an ongoing basis. So I think that you know it's not, there's no particular set answer. It'll vary on your start point, but actually the important thing is that you are committed to the moral and ethical obligations that a professional has as they undertake their career.
Quite right, and I'm very impressed that the answers you've given so far are pretty much exactly what we'd give us from the Society for the Environment. So it's really useful to hear. Jim, did you want to come in on this one?
Well, I think John and Erin have covered off the basis. Particularly endorse the point John was making there. It's professional recognition by peers, and it does take a while to build up the portfolio of evidence that is required to demonstrate not just your skills and knowledge, which is possibly the easier part of demonstrating competency, but it's the communication, the leadership, and the personal commitment to maintaining and enhancing your knowledge in a changing world. It does take time to build up that evidence set and to be able to demonstrate that they are at the appropriate level. So, working in an organization like Arup or one of the many other consultancies, it may be a decade or so into your career where you've actually had the opportunities to actually test yourself in those environments and to understand what is actually required in order to then put yourself forward. But the good thing is that those professional bodies licensed by SocEnv are very supportive as you begin to explore what it is that you have to do and how you actually evidence that you actually can demonstrate the competency. So my advice in these instances will be to talk to your professional body to understand how they can support you in as much as they share the ambition for you to be a chartered environmentalist through their license arrangement.
Wise words indeed. Yeah, absolutely. From a Society for Environment point of view, we agree. It varies massively in terms of when you become ready to become a chartered environmentalist. Career paths are very, very different. We don't specify you need to have a specific amount of years experience because your career path can be very, very different, whether that's technically led, whether it's leadership led, or there's all manner of different. Chartered environmentalists are in huge amounts of different sectors and roles and so on. So it's very varied, and it's set up in a way that it captures that variance, that range of professionals. And so it should, because they're all meeting that standard, just in different ways, maybe at different times, very different careers. But that's okay, because you're all working towards our one vision of a sustainable future, and you have the competence to show that you could do that. So I also wanted to pick on the fact that, as Erin said, it can be a personal choice. It can be based on your career goals. We now know that there are numerous organisations that require environmental chartership to progress to certain levels within an organisation. That's mainly a consultancy thing, but it's across other types of organisations as well, which we're relatively pleased to see. It's fair to say we want people making those kind of decisions in that level to have the verified competence. So thank you very much for those answers. We don't have a huge amount of time left, but I'm going to pick up on a couple of things. Erin, you mentioned about continuous learning and keeping up to date and so on, which is a massive part of being a chartered environmentalist. And John, you mentioned about how important the cross-learning elements are. I wondered if anyone had any top tips about the kind of where you guys have found the resources to continue your professional development through CPD and so on. Where have you turned to? Is it the professional bodies, or is it through university courses? Is it through simply reading a lot? Anybody want to comment on that? Jim, can I pick on you? John, you've unmuted. Go for John.
Well, I was just going to say, there's such a plethora of resource, particularly in the internet age, available to you. And I think you have to you have to pick and mix, and the risk we all carry is information overload. So I think you need to be selective, and you need to sort of work out what it is you want to do. It needs to relate to what you're trying to achieve in the short or medium term as a part of your development. So if you are dealing with a particular nutty problem, then you need to research it, and that any professional will try and do that. That's what differentiates you from people who don't are not professional about their work. They just come up with, they think they know it, and they do it. Whereas actually professionals don't do that. They do that research, and they do that developing their understanding to ensure that what they're producing is optimal or best. And I think that in my case, I've done learning by doing quite effectively during my career by changing. So I moved from the Engineering Council as a civil engineer to the Institution of Chemical Engineers. I learned a huge amount from chemical engineers by taking that step. And there's a risk associated with taking such a step. And then I've sort of learned a lot again by then moving into mineral products. And I now know an awful lot more about cement and quarrying than I did as a civil engineer. Whilst I used a lot of that sort of aggregates and sand and what have you as a civil engineer, I didn't actually understand where it came from. Understanding where it came from makes me a bit better civil engineer, because I then can make a more informed, a better decision about resource procurement than I would have done if I hadn't got that understanding. So I think it's, as I said in my earlier talk, look over the fence, keep looking over the fence and see what others are doing. You've just got to be inquisitive.
Inquisitive is a very good message indeed. Would anybody else like to come in on that for a quick response?
I'll just jump in there. I've been very fortunate to work in a university. I have at my disposal enormous resources to draw upon. So it's perhaps a lot easier for me to keep up to date. And I continue to do so, even though I've retired from my day job, as it were. I still draw upon all the resources that the university mechanisms can provide for me, because I'm still active across the environment and sustainability space, both nationally and internationally. And I'll continue to do that, and I'll continue to keep my charterships and my other professional recognitions live and kicking, because I've still got something to offer.
Quite right indeed, quite right.
If I could just say something about CPD, and CPD for professional to maintain professional accreditation can feel like a chore, right? Sometimes if we're very busy. What I try to do is remember what I care about, and connect what I most care about, or what I'm most curious about, that kind of inquisitiveness, that curiosity, and try to use the fact that I have to do CPD to carve out the time for it. So I love environmental history, and I'd like to understand how big changes have taken place in the Earth's history. So Peter Frankopan's book, The Earth Transformed, was pretty important, and I recommend it, especially if you think that this Earth can take anything thrown at it. Not so sure. And climate science. I mean, there are some podcasts out there that are very, very reputable. Choose the ones that are from the sources with credibility. If you don't know about what's happening in the debates around the ocean circulation, the Potsdam Institute in Germany is the place to go, and they've got some interesting podcasts there and webinars in English.
Good advice indeed. Thank you very much. Can I take one chair's privilege opportunity to put you on the spot, each of you? We'll go in turn of when we spoke to you. Just for final words on why you might encourage somebody else to join you and 8,000 other Chartered Environmentalists as Chartered Environmentalists, for about 30 seconds or so. Jim?
Because the state of the planet requires so many more people to be both informed and capable and competent to make a difference. Huge, huge task in front of the collective humanity. And the more people that are environmentally aware and able to put awareness into practice in a professional way, the better it will be for the planet and all who call it home.
Yeah, and within that jigsaw, people could play big roles, people could play small roles, but it's all roles to make a difference. John, come to you, same question.
I just think that if you're sitting there, not had peer recognition, then you're doing yourself a disservice, because the credibility that peer recognition provides is the best recognition that exists, and I think to be recognised by my peers is something that I really value.
Excellent. And final words over to Erin.
Well, I think in some circles, environmentalist as a term is a term of it's a negative term. There are some politicians in this world who don't believe in environmental science, in the truths of environmental science, climate science, and so I think it's really important that there's a professional accreditation. We're chartered environmentalists, and we understand things that really do drive our world. So I think it's very important at this moment for the number of chartered environmentalists to grow, not just for the reason that Jim mentioned, but I completely agree with you, Jim. The Earth needs it, but also I think the kind of the denial that we've got challenges needs to be counteracted professionally.
Quite right. And I'm very pleased to put you on the spot now. So there's some very excellent final words. So thank you very much for that. And in terms of final words from me, it start with a huge thank you to our three guests. So thank you very much for sharing your insights. It's been really, really interesting to hear about your career and how CEnv has helped and what the future might look like or should look like possibly. So thank you very much for that. And thank you for those who listened and could take part today. And thank you for the questions. Sorry we weren't able to get to all of your questions. Now, if you're watching on the recording, please do like and subscribe to our channel on YouTube. That would be fantastic. For those who want to hear more about the Chartered Environmentalists turning 20 or Chartered Environmentalists overall, so you want to become a Chartered Environmentalist, so you want to find out who they are and what they do, if you could head to our website, that's the best place to go. The website on your screen right now is to find out more about 20 years of various different insights. We've done this webinar, which is fantastic, but there's various blogs on there, there's various videos and articles and that kind of thing, so that's the place to go. So thank you once again for everyone involved, especially our guests today, and we shall see you in the next Society for the Environment webinar at some point soon. Thank you very much.